Hey, welcome to Downtown Community Church. My name is Ben, and we started a couple weeks ago in a relationship series, and the reason is because, well, one, we don't think that Jesus died and rose from the dead so we could have bad marriages, but the reality is we started off talking week one how all of us are on a path, whether you are single, whether you are dating, whether you're engaged, married, just newly married, been married for a long time, we're all on a path, and if we were to determine, or if we were to investigate and say, the path that we're on, does it lead us to the destination that we ultimately want us to go? Because we all make decisions every day. We make communications decisions. We make conflict resolution decisions. We make all kinds of decisions that set us on a path. And if we were to take the logical conclusion of the path that we're on, does it lead us to the destination for many of us is happiness. It's happiness. We just want to be happy. But the problem is happiness is not the goal. Happiness is a byproduct of the goal. The goal for a Christian is holiness. And in being holy and being more like Jesus, we find happiness, but not happiness that's determined by outside circumstances and what happens in life, but this deep-seated sense of joy that goes beyond what we experience on the day-to-day, this deep sense of contentment and love for people. So this week, in case you couldn't tell, I'm going to talk specifically to the men. So, men, this is for you. Women, I'm glad that you're here. You can kind of take a load off, and you can kind of just relax a little bit. You can kick your feet up and grab the remote if you want to, kind of tune out. I'm going to talk specifically to the men because what I find, and the reason behind this, what I find is, men, there is a huge problem with how we view, treat, and think about women. There is an almost epidemic in our culture with how we view, with how we treat, and with how we think about women, so much so that the women have actually started to have a response similar to what men, honestly, for decades, if not centuries, in fact, actual centuries, have treated women like this. And so what we're going to do is today, I think that one of the greatest deterrents from us having extraordinary relationships and extraordinary marriages is men, the way we view, think, and treat about women. Specifically your wife, but inclusive of all women that there are. And so here's the lie that we've bought into. And this lie, by the way, is all around. This lie is presented, it's viewed, it's on screens, it's sung about, and it's heralded. And here's the lie that we have bought into. And I'm going to tell you kind of the reciprocal of how the ladies have responded. Men, here's what it is. Women are a commodity. Women are commodities, or women are objects. And if you know what a commodity is, then you know this. A commodity is simply something that has value. And the way that you treat a commodity is you do what you can to acquire that commodity until you either take all of its value or you find something of greater value. You use that value or you use that commodity until you have taken all of its value and you're ready to give it back until you find another one, or you just hang on to that one because it has some remaining value until you find something that's more valuable. We objectify and commoditize women. In other words, this is kind of how that goes. Take me, use me, and when you're through getting whatever you want out of me, dispose of me. Take me, use me, and dispose. Now, women, you would never say that, but that is how you are presented. And for many of us guys, that's how we look at and treat and view women. And so, ladies, you kind of have had the bounce back effect, which, to be honest, is reasonable. Which is, if you're going to look at me and objectify me and commoditize me, well, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to use my body to leverage to get what I want. I'm going to use my objectification and my commoditization as a PowerPoint and as a leverage point. Let me just tell you, I don't blame you. I blame the guys. Because, men, I think that in many ways, you still set the pace. You still set the pace. You still are the primary ones that are responsible for this. Now, as we're going through, one of the things that I know that's going to be true about this, and by the way, if it's your first time here, you're like, man, why did I pick this Sunday as the first Sunday, okay? Come back next week. It's going to be so cheery. But at some point, there's going to be something where it's kind of fly in the face. It flies in the face of culture, right? Because if culture says that, women are objects, women are commodities, take me, use me, and dispose of me when you find something better, then what we're going to say a little bit old school. Do people actually, do men actually treat women like that these days? Is that, even something that's attainable or reasonable? Which I'm going to argue, one, absolutely yes. But here's what you need to know. We're going to read a few passages of Scripture that if it flies in the face of our culture, it is hard to grasp how much this flew in the face of the culture of the early church. So let me, I don't have a ton of time to spend on this, but let me just kind of hit this real quick, and I wish I could go into lots of detail about it. When the New Testament was written, when Jesus walked around, when these letters were being compiled, and these documents were being compiled, women weren't viewed as commodities. They were commodities. Women did not have power. Women did not have authority. Women did not have rank. In fact, if you were a Greek or a Roman, you probably owned a slave, or you probably owned slaves, and especially with slave women, you could do anything you wanted to them. You could do anything you want with them. In fact, you could have them killed and there was no recourse, or there was no kind of bounce back or pushback or any type of a law enforcement from that. In fact, if you were a guy, you could not only do anything you wanted to your slave, but you could do anything that you wanted to with a prostitute. In fact, prostitution was not only legal, it was encouraged. It was the encouraged means of birth control. You could do anything you want with the slave women, or you could do anything you want with prostitutes, or just concubines, just in general. You could do anything that you wanted to, and there was no pushback. In fact, here's what's crazy. They didn't even see that as adultery. It was a positive. So here's what happened. In fact, this was the law when Jesus walked on planet Earth. That men, by and large, understood this, and they said, well, I don't have to deal with the inconvenience and the hassle of a wife, and I don't really want kids, and because, they're annoying, and they cry, and they get me up early in the morning. So, I'm going to, kind of punt on those ideas. And so here's what the men would do. They just decided, if I don't have to have the hassle of the wife or the hassle of the kids, and someday I'm going to adopt somebody, and their adoption wasn't like, oh, sweet baby. It was you would adopt basically a grown man who you found responsible, worthy to inherit your estate, and you would pass it along to them. They would oftentimes take your last name and kind of carry on your tradition. So they punted on marriage. There was a tax when Jesus walked planet Earth that if they also saw the Romans saw the value of the family unit. So if you were a wealthy Roman man and you were above the age of 25, if you were not married, you were taxed according to your wealth because they had gotten rid of marriage. In fact, 2 different times there was a bill before the Senate to mandate marriage because the men basically said, if I cannot deal with the hassle of a wife, the hassle of kids, and have all the sex I want, why would I get married? Sounds familiar. And they'd say, yeah. Where we just view commoditization and objectification, they just had it. And here's what's crazy. I mean, I could go on and on with examples. I'll give you one more. Kids, babies. Nobody wanted baby girls. Nobody wanted baby girls. And so in order to get rid of the baby girls, it was terrible. They would have a baby, a wife would birth a child. And this child, if it had any physical defect, would automatically be done with this. Or for the most part, if it was a girl, they would do this. It was called exposure. And here's what would happen. Birth a child, hold it up. They didn't have the ultrasounds. It's like, oh, it's a boy. Look, little turtle. If you don't have kids, you have no clue what I mean by that. But let's just say that's how you know it's a boy, okay? But they would look at this and they'd hold it up and say, okay, it's a girl. Now, this is I kid you not. This is difficult for me to almost talk about when I think about my kids. They would look at it and say, it's a girl. We're going to expose her, which means we're going to put her in a clay jar. We're going to set her out by the road, and we're going to distance ourselves. We're not going to take responsibility for what happens to this kid. That was a way of basically killing the baby but not feeling responsible as a parent. And the reason they thought that was, that way, if any passerby or wants to just go and pick up a little baby girl, hey, you can have her. She was just born. Have at her, bud. You go nuts, and you take this girl, or perhaps the gods will spare her. And infanticide was all over the place in the early Roman world because women weren't simply viewed as commodities, they were commodities. Even the women who were the wives of the wealthiest men were only a couple clicks above a slave. Let me tell you, as much as we see this, we think, I don't know. We can't imagine how different this was. But man, let me tell you, Jesus was the one who kicked this whole thing off. He would live in such a way. You know, one day he was walking along. He sees a woman who's been caught in the act of adultery. They're about to kill her because she's been caught in adultery. For us, we just, post on Facebook about it, but they killed him. And so Jesus looks at her and doesn't just say, no, stop. He kneels down, probably puts his hand on her back and talks to her. Says, what's going on? And she says, this is what happened. They're about to stone me. And he says, if anybody else has done this, then you throw the first stone. And she looks up at him and he says, where'd your accusers go? She says, they're gone. He said, so go. I forgive you. Which you wouldn't have talked to, let alone touch a woman who was about to be killed because it was that severe. Because when you're a commodity and you do something that the person who owns the commodity doesn't want you to do, you no longer have value and you just get rid of. Jesus was walking one day. He sees this woman at the well. She was a Samaritan woman. Significant because Jews didn't have anything to do with Samaritans. Didn't like him, didn't want anything to do with him. In fact, Jesus was walking from one place to another place, and most Jews who went from one place to another place, and Samaria was in the middle, they would walk around Samaria. Now, Samaria is not small, right? That's like you're saying, man, I'm going from Wakulla to, well, you're in Wakulla, so let's just pray for you first, but you're going from Wakulla to Thomasville, and you're saying, okay, I'm going to go, I'm going to Uber, I'm going to walk around Tallahassee because they didn't want to interface. And so Jesus sees this Samaritan woman, not only says hey to her, not only talks to her, but he actually drinks from her same cup. Now, to us, we're like, yeah, he was thirsty. They would have said, are you kidding me? You don't walk through Samaria. You don't talk to a Samaritan. You especially don't talk to a Samaritan woman, but you drank from the same cup and had Jesus, we've had his disciples come up. They're trying to figure out, what are you doing? Because I'm telling you, this whole thing was launched by Jesus himself. If you got your Bible, you can open up in John chapter 13. Jesus is having a conversation with the disciples. It's at the Last Supper. And this is kind of the verse that we're going to use as a launching point. So John chapter 13, we're going to go to verse 34. He had just got done washing a bunch of his disciples' feet. Big sign of service. He says this to his disciples, a new commandment I give to you. Now, they were gathered, they were at dinner. It was probably just men at the table because of their time and their culture. And as men are gathered, probably, the women would be there. They'd be within earshot, and they would be the ones that were, putting food on the table and kind of taking it off. And so he says, I'm going to give you a new commandment. In fact, it's going to be an old commandment, but it's going to feel like it's new because it's going to have some new teeth to it. A new commandment I give to you, that you love one another. Now, for them, this was so counterculture because Jesus did not put any gender identification in this. He did not say, men, I want you to love one another, which, would have been probably what they would have expected. But he said, no, I want you to love one another. No, whoever they are, men, women, slaves, free, Greek, Jew, I want you to just love one another, which somebody probably would have raised their hand and said, Jesus, got a question. Yeah, Peter, what you got, man? What about the women? Yep, even the women. Like, are you sure? Yep, even the women. I want you to love one another. I do not want there to be a discrepancy between the way that you love one another. And he says, this is how. Just as I have loved you. In other words, you've seen me walk. You've seen me talk. You've seen me minister. You have seen how I have loved you. So men, I want you to view, I want you to treat, I want you to look at, and I want you to serve women. In their culture, that was outrageous. I want you to serve women just in the same way that I have served you. Jesus, even the girls? Yes, you idiot, of course. Even the girls. He says, and by the way, as you do this, as you do this, if I have loved you, by this, all people will know that you are my disciples if you have love for one another. This is fascinating. In a culture, in a world where women were objects and commodities, the reputation of the early church was that they elevated women, and I'm telling you, women flocked to these little churches. They didn't call churches, they called them ecclesias. These little ecclesias all over the Mediterranean rim, they would just flock and flock and flock because for the first time, they not only had, a sense of a little bit more value, they were valued. In fact, in a lot of ways, they were the ones being served and deferred to. Paul speaks to this, and in Ephesians chapter 5, we're going to go there, because he talks, and he just kind of clarifies all this clutter as he says, husbands, this is how we are to love and to treat our wives. Ephesians 5, you got your, you flip over to that. Ephesians 5, starting at verse 25, he says, Husbands, love your wives. We're going to come to that, back to that part. As Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her. Now, he says, husbands, here's your job. You saw how Jesus loved the church. They said, yeah. He gave himself up for her. He served. He says, yeah, so I want you to do the exact same thing for your wife. Let me kind of define some stuff, because here's our tendency. We immediately contextualize with a self-serving bias in this. We like to say, okay, yeah, so here's what I'm doing. I'm just going to, I know as the husband, it's my job to love and to serve my wife, and so I'm going to do some things. I'm going to help out, and so man, I'm just going to be such a servant. I'm going to do the dishes. And everybody's like, oh, what a servant. He's such a wonderful guy. Here's what he meant by that. Husbands, I want you to love. In their words, in their Greek definitions, they had 4 different types of love. One love was kind of an empathetic love. It was a kind of a connection, a relational, a familial type of love almost. Another love was kind of it was a mixture of like a brotherly / an emotional love. Like you just felt this sense of love and emotion towards this person. The next one was eros. It was an erotic love. And the last one was agape. It was an unconditional love. Now, here's the significance of agape. Because many of us, right, we're familiar with that term. It's like, oh, agape, I just love you unconditionally. And it's like this, like, deer in the headlights, like, oh, Here's what agape was. Agape, in fact, this actual word that he used is the verb form of the noun agape, which means this was the action point, because agape had nothing to do with emotion. It's almost a calculated decision. It's a calculated, unconditional decision, premeditated decision of the will that no matter what, I am going to love and serve you. I am going to totally die to myself. So he says, I want you to unconditionally love and serve your wife. In a culture where, again, a wife was simply a click or two above a slave. He says, men, here's your job. You are to love, serve, honor, and when you walk down the aisle, you are saying, I do, but not just I do. You're saying, I have decided that I am going to totally die to myself. Now, here's why this is important. If you are single or you are dating, you cannot decide your entire life that women are commodities, women are commodities, women are commodities. I'm going to objectify, and then go down and expect to walk down the aisle, put a ring on someone's finger, and think, now I'm going to totally die to myself. You practice like you play, and you play like you practice. This should be the view of every single man to every single woman, but specifically in the relational roles of the husband. Men, it does not matter how lovable your wife is. It doesn't matter how Jesus-like she is. Your commandment, my commandment, our commandment is to, when I walk down the aisle and say I do, total Denial of self. Everything is you first, you first, you first. What's best for you, what's best for what your desires are, your goals are, your dreams are. It's for the empowerment and the sanctification. This is so important that he says this on the back end of it, because it's not just, oh, do whatever you want with whatever you want, wherever you want. He says that he might, this is what Jesus did for us, sanctify her, and present the church to himself in splendor without spot or wrinkle or any such thing, that she might be holy and without blemish. This is where we get it wrong. Because, man, here's what we think. We live our lives because our lives are lovable. When you think about the context of the gospel, isn't this true? Jesus didn't die for us because we were lovable. He died for us because we are sinful and rebellious. In our sinfulness, in our rebellion, and if you're not kind of new to faith or new to church, this is important for you to hear. The understanding of the Christian is not that we just, love God and try to do some things to earn his good favor. It's that we realize, man, I'm sinful, I'm broken, I'm a rebellious person. And God, in his extraordinary, really inexplicable love, saw me in my rebellion, in my unlovableness. And he sent his son to die for me in my rebellion. Not that I could earn my way into God's good graces, but because I couldn't. That I don't have to earn my way to God, I just by trusting that Jesus, you were the ultimate sacrifice. He says, so men, here's your job. Here's your marching orders. You saw what Jesus did, right? Yep. You saw how unlovable the church was, right? Yep. Okay. Now I want you to go do the same thing. But Jesus, I don't know if you know what our culture says. Nobody does that. Don't care. Let me tell you. Men, this is your job regardless of the lovability of your wife. Now, pause. This is why I think finding a wife who understands this and gets this is so important. Because there's mutual submission. There's mutual, I'm going to love you, I'm going to serve you, I'm going to love you, I'm going to serve you. If there is not a reciprocation of the mandate, that I don't have to have a reciprocated love for this to be a biblical command for me. But let me tell you, it makes it a whole lot easier. She says, man, this is your job. In fact, Peter would go behind that and say something even more, pressing with immediate consequence to it. This is what Peter says. 1 Peter chapter 3, verse 7. He says, likewise, husbands. Likewise, husbands. The reason he says likewise there, by the way, is he's just talking about, he basically said, ladies, here's your role, submit, okay? Now, pause. That is so wildly misinterpreted because here's what it should mean. I'm going to put my wife, defer to my wife, her needs, her wants, her yearnings, her longings, her sanctification first. And her submission is simply saying, okay, I'll let you put me first. That's the biblical version of what marriage looks like. There's this mutual, you first, right? This is like the super annoying couple that they're going to the restaurant and somebody's holding the door and the other person's holding the door. It's like, you first, no, you first, no, you first, no, you first. And it's like, okay, we get it. You love Jesus. Just go in the stinking restaurant, Like that's what marriage should look like. And so he says, likewise, in other words, husbands, you have a similar thing in the function of relationship, that there is this mutual sense that what's best for you, what's best for you. He says, likewise, husbands, live with your wives in an understanding way, because oftentimes men aren't terribly understanding. You ever think about that? He says, showing honor. We're going to talk about that in just one second. To the woman as the weaker vessel. Now, ladies, before you get offended by that, here's what that means. If you and your husband get in a deadlift contest, okay, he's probably going to win. This had nothing to do with you were inferior, you're intellectually incapable, you're less gifted. No, this meant if you guys arm wrestle, he's probably going to win. But honestly, ladies, some of y'all lift and your fella doesn't, so you might win that one too right now, okay? It's 2018. But what he's saying is, here's the point. In their culture especially, women were just physically weaker. So he says, so men, you aren't supposed to see that and leverage that and take advantage of that because you could. Especially in their culture, most of the women were uneducated. He's talking here physically, but in every way, they were weaker. And so there was that propensity. Again, commoditization, objectification, you're an object. And so I'm going to he says, no, here's what I want you to do. Instead of leveraging your strength and your power physically, I want you to honor, not take advantage. I want you to honor, not commoditize. I want you to honor. You know what it means to honor somebody? We've all been in this situation, by the way. It's when you walk in the room and somebody's more important than you. It's when you walk in the room and somebody's more important than you. Maybe you've walked in and there was somebody who did something, they sacrificed, they served in the military, they did something, and they were just this person of honor that everybody was in respect of. In fact, we've all been probably to a place where someone was more important than us. If you've ever been to a wedding, you know this. In fact, if you're married and you're a guy, you know you aren't even the most important person at your wedding, you know? You walk in and everybody walks in and the bride, and the groom, but the bride, is the most important person. In fact, in our family, just let me be honest for a second. I am habitually late to things. I call it tardy because it sounds better. But like the one non-negotiable is we can't be late to weddings, right? Because like you don't want to walk in at the same time as the bride, which I hate to admit that I've done that before. But can you imagine? Can you imagine this? Can you imagine walking into a wedding and all the people have processed in, the families have all sat down, the bridesmaids, they kind of did their thing and they smiled, and all of a sudden here comes the bride. Everybody stands up, because the bride is the person of honor, and the bride walks in, and you're walking in oh dang it, hey. Bride, 1 second, right? I'm gonna give you the mic back, but first I need to talk for a second, and you just kind of dapper, and you walk down to the aisle, and you kind of find you would never, ever, ever do that. Paul says, come on, that is the picture. That is the picture of showing honor, of showing deference, of showing respect. And this was so opposite of their culture. But Peter said, and Paul said, and Jesus said, this is the biblical role of the man, that you are to do this not only with your wives, but with every woman that you lock eyes with. Every person that you are ever to eyeball. In fact, he explains that in the very next sentence. Showing honor to the woman as a weaker vessel, since they are heirs with you of the grace of life. In other words, every woman, every lady that you have ever seen is a daughter of God and a co-heir with you in the kingdom of God. And so you're going to objectify God's? He says they're co-heirs with you of the grace of life. And then he puts the level of importance and responsibility. This is why I say, men, we're responsible. So that your prayers may not be hindered. In other words, God's looking down and said, so you treated her horribly. You think that you're going to treat my daughter horribly and I'm going to listen to what you have to say? Man, how many of us have prayed to God and God did not listen because of how he treated a woman, a lady, a wife? I was reading a commentary about this whole thing. Really challenging question. He said this: is your wife more holy? You can say your girlfriend, whoever. Is your wife more holy because of you or in spite of you? Is your wife more holy because of you or in spite of you? And God's saying, well, of course. I mean, look at this. Can you imagine? Okay, so I got 2 kids. Ava, she's about 3.5, and Rhodes is about 1.5. Almost 2 now. They're really funny, and I love them to death. They have their own quirks and personalities. Rhodes is kind of like an individual man. He's just like, man, let me do my own thing. And Ava loves her little brother. That's her best friend, so she cuddles and all that kind of stuff. And from time to time, she's an overactive cuddler, we call it. And Rose is like, it's morning time. I'm trying to watch Moana. Get out of my face. And so he literally just reaches back and slaps her. And I'm like, no, stop. Now I want you to imagine this. Just think about this. If as a father, some dads in here, you get this, but imagine yourself as a father, as a parent. Right? I want you to imagine that Rhodes is playing and Ava's playing. Rhodes walks over to Ava and slaps her in the face, looks at me and goes, Dad, can I have a cookie? Like, no, you jerk. Are you kidding me? Like, oh yeah, here, have a dozen, In fact, Trader Joe's, there's pumpkin spice, You just go crazy. No. I'd say, are you kidding me? Look at how you just treated my daughter. Yeah, you're my son, but look at just how you just treated my daughter. Man, let me be honest. We have bought into this culture of objectification and commoditization. And because of that, we need to start to do some things differently in our lives. Because the reality is, for many of us, we don't know what life is like without it. It's crazy. There have been studies. There have been studies on how pornography affects the brain. You know what their most difficult problem with studying how pornography affects the brain? They have a really difficult time finding college-aged men who have not already been overly exposed to it. There's no control group. That's the problem. It's crazy. No. I'm about to go into some of the application because I haven't made this clear. It is our job and our role and our responsibility to love, serve, honor, and respect, defer to, and in marriage, die to, for the empowerment and the sanctification of the daughters of God. So let me tell you a couple things that have been helpful for me. Let me give you 3 challenges. And here's why I'm going to say these challenges. My hope is not to pick on you and say, oh, you're terrible, you're terrible, you're terrible. Here's my hope. I want to inspire you to be the man that you want to be. I want to inspire you to be the man that perhaps you're supposed to be and perhaps even that God has called you to be. Just 3 specific challenges with this, okay? So men, if you zoned out and started counting, how many lights are in those chandeliers? Come on, tune back in. This is the important part. This is where the rubber meets the road on this. Number 1, if you, I would say regularly, but if you, with any type of consistency or just really at all, view sexually explicit material, before this, however you define that, whether that is in person or on a screen, before the sun goes down tonight, you need to find accountability. Before the sun goes down tonight, you need to have someone in your life that every week is going to ask you. And let me just tell you, it should be a guy, okay? It's going to get real weird if it's not. But you should have a guy in your life that's asking you, have you viewed any sexually explicit material this week? Because here's what happens. I wish I had time to go into all the details of this. It's very fascinating, the effects of pornography on the brain. But let me just kind of give you the 10,000 level view of this. Number 1, you learn, this is kind of the school of thought you're indoctrinated into. Number 1, a real woman's body will never be enough for you. Number 2, one woman's body will never be enough for you. Number 3, your wife's body will never be enough for you. A real woman's body will never be enough for you. One woman's body will never be enough for you. And your wife's body will never be enough for you. So here's what I want you to do. I want you to, before the sun goes down tonight, find accountability. I don't want you to pray about it. I don't want you to think about it. And God, would you give me, it might be that you're walking out of church this morning and you're sitting there like I don't know anybody else, and you just see another dude. You don't even know if he's saved or not. Hey, will you be my accountability partner? I would rather you do that than not find anybody. And here's what was helpful for me. So I struggled with this, especially coming out of college, or especially out of high school into early college. I went to a Fellowship of Christian Athletes leadership meeting. And at the end of the leadership meeting, they did accountability. I didn't know that they did accountability at the end of the meeting, or else I probably wouldn't have gone, to be honest. So they kind of conned me into it. And we're going through, getting in there, we're going to stick around for accountability. I'm like, fellas, I don't know, I got to eat. I'm not trying to stay for this. But everybody had to stay, everybody had to do it. We're going around, and the question was asked, did you view sexually explicit material this week? And this guy was like, no. I'm like, I hate all of you right now, because I'm thinking dang it. So then we get this other guy that's like, yeah. And I'm like, whew. My brother. Here's the problem. Here's what he said. I kid you not. This is this guy. Yeah, he was on the track team. I was looking at this running magazine, and there was this girl in this advertisement, and I just felt like I looked at it a little too long. I'm like, what? what are you talking about? And then he was like, and then, man, I just, I started to really question myself because, there's, this girl and I gave her a hug and I'm just thinking like, am I hugging her because I love her and I value her or because it makes me look cool? I'm like, what? Like, I don't feel saved at this point in the meeting. So it gets around to me, and I was going to say, yeah. And so Pastor Reggie Hutchins, he pastors Unity Baptist Church on the south side of town here. He is one of the chaplains for Florida State's football team, which we'll pray for that referee who judges backward passes. But another sermon another day, Pastor Reggie Hutchins was there, and here's what he said. Okay, you get a free pass this week. If you do it again, here's what I want you to do. Because accountability can turn into just cyclical patterns of admission. Here's what I want you to do. Next time that happens, I want you to write me a 5-paragraph essay. What? Here's what I want you to do. Paragraph 1, introduction. Paragraph 2, I want you to write me a paragraph about what were the decisions that led up to you making that decision, right? Because it's not just a decision. You're on a path. You went home when you knew that nobody was home. You got on the computer when you know you're susceptible to it. You started to look at some stuff when you know you shouldn't have. And it was a progression that you finally got to that you did that. So I want you to write me a paragraph about the progression. Number 2, or paragraph number 3, step number 2 is I want you to write what you looked at. I'm like, I am never going to write this paper, And number 3, I want you to write me a paragraph about how you're going to stop from doing it again. I'm like, well, I'll tell you how I'm going to stop from doing it again. This paper is enough for me to never do this again. So, men, let me tell you, I'm going to give you 2 options here, okay? Number 1 is that you find accountability, and by the time the sun goes down tonight, you find accountability if this is a problem or a struggle for you, which for most of us, it either is or has been. You find accountability the first time, because I want you to be able to admit it this week and just say yes. After that, here's what I want you to do, okay? If you do it again, and I'm not saying this because I want to pick on you, I care about your purity this much. I want you to write me a 5-paragraph essay. I had a pastor who loved me enough to make me face the consequence of being very transparent with my sin and documenting. And I want you to email me, Ben, B-E-N, at dcctally.com. And I promise you, I will read every one of those emails. It's not because I'm bad. Because I think at the core of it, purity paves the way to intimacy in marriage. And so let me give you option number 2. If you don't want to do that, that's fine. But if you struggle with this and you don't want accountability, then here's what I'm going to challenge you to do. I'm going to challenge you to be a man about it. So not tonight, but maybe in a couple weeks. If you're dating, I want you to take your girlfriend out, on a nice little romantic dinner. If you're married, take your wife out on a nice little romantic dinner. Or, if you're single and you're hoping to date at some point in life, when you have a girlfriend, I want you to take her out to dinner, okay? Nice, and I'd suggest Ricardo's. It's got a nice little environment. The quality of food to the price is fantastic. A little Italian food. When you take her out, and don't do it at first because it'd be awkward. It's going to be awkward either way, but sometime around the time when dessert's about to come out, maybe you've had a couple glasses of wine, or, if you're Baptist, a couple cups of coffee, and here's what I want you to do. Now, I'm dead serious when I say this. I want you to just hold her hand, look across the table, and say, I love you enough to be honest with you. I'm not willing to struggle or to fight in this. I'm not willing to engage in the battle. And so I just want you to know going forward, a real body will never be enough for me. One body will never be enough for me. And I just want you to look at her and say, with all the love I have, I just have to be honest. Your body will never be enough for me. Now, why wouldn't you have that conversation? If you're a man, why wouldn't you just be honest? I mean, if you're going to decide that anyway, you might as well just decide to be transparent. Tell the truth, because you're going to decide it. Number 2, I won't take as much time with these last 2. Be real quick. Number 2, for some of us it's so bad, and you're bombarded with this message every day. For some of you, you need to go through your playlist, and any song that talks, degradingly, objectifies, or commoditizes women, need to be gone from your playlist by the end of the day. Not many people are going to listen to this. Not many people are going to do this. But for some of us, it's so bad. You can't live in 2018 and not get this message somehow, but you can do something different than inviting that in. And that's going to be tough because virtually every song is about that. And you're sitting there thinking, what am I going to listen to, right? It's like you're going to have to listen to like some Eagles, like Hotel California, On a Dark Desert. That's like your playlist for the next year. And let me tell you, this is not like, hey, so let's all get in a circle and burn our secular CDs. It has nothing to do with that. But here's the point. If this is that much of an issue, it has that much roots in you. In fact, brief kind of nuance to this. The neuroscience behind this is as you engage in pornography, the actual part of the executive functioning of the brain gets lessened and lessened and weakened and weakened and weakened. It's why it's harder and harder and harder to stop because your brain pumps dopamine into your brain. And eventually that part that says stop, 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 don't is not saying stop, not saying don't. It's so weak that it's almost like you can't stop. So you need to take out any triggers. This is why, by the way, molestation is so rampant in our culture because we live in a culture that has given into this and given into this and given into this, and our willpower to say, you know what? If that was my daughter, I would never do that. But since that's yours, I will. Because we no longer have the willpower because we've eroded the executive functioning in our brain. Look it up for yourself. In fact, you're skeptical, right? You believe in science. Research it. Okay, number 3. Number 3 is this. Go in your phone, men. Go in your phone. And I want you to scroll forward to 1 year from today. Even fewer people are probably going to listen to this and do this. But if you do, I'm telling you, this has so much power. Scroll 1 year forward in your calendar. And I want you to highlight that entire day. And here's what I wanted to say. Resume dating. Resume dating. And I don't mean this as like, if you're in the battle and you're fighting it and you got accountability and you're working towards holiness, maybe this is for you, maybe this isn't for you. If you just deep down know. Just want you to highlight that and say resume dating because perhaps you need a year of accountability. You need a year of the music. You need a year to just put off. And so you just need to say, resume dating. And here's what I tell you if you do that. About December, you're going to meet this wonderful lady. You're going to be like, okay, God, did you really mean a year? Or February's going to come around. You're like, God, or then spring break's going to come around. You're like, God, and God's going to say, yes, I really meant it at spring break, But you're going to meet and then you're going to want to text and, just stop. Just a year to hit the reset button. Again, this isn't for everybody. But for some of us, it is. And here's why I say this, because men, there are a whole lot of women who are almost at the point that they don't believe this guy exists anymore. I'm not talking about perfect. And in fact, I should have said this at the beginning of the sermon. I am so far from perfect in this. You can ask my wife. She is at this service, okay? Like yesterday, all right, yesterday, did some stuff in the morning, like, I helped with the car, But then I took a solid nap and watched the game and then ate dinner, okay? That was my day. So I'm saying I'm not perfect at this. But here's the point. Men, there is a whole group of women who almost believe that this guy does not exist anymore. And if you for a year hit the pause button, if you just spend time working and becoming the person, becoming the man that God has called you to be, that you would honor, dignify, glorify, defer to, respect, empower, and sanctify every woman that you meet eyeball to eyeball with, let me tell you, you will be one of the few and the proud men who are actually becoming the men that God has called us to become. And let me just tell you, this isn't why you should do it. But if you look at any of the pastors of our church, William, myself, and especially Jeff Kerwin, okay, and you look at us on our wedding day and our wife on our wedding day, you'd say, how did Meatball get beautiful girl, right? We were the only hot dog stand in the city, and so our wife had to shop there. I'm telling you. You shouldn't do it because of that. But perhaps you're going to marry way out of your league because, I'm telling you, there are ladies all over the place who have almost given up on the idea that this actually exists. And perhaps, if we actually do this, perhaps the reputation of the church will be different. I mean, come on. What would it be like if the reputation of the church was the reputation of the early church? That there was such an honoring, an empowerment, a service to and for the sanctification. What if that was the reputation of the church? I think there would be a lot more people who would be open to church. In fact, maybe for you, this is your problem, is that you've experienced this at church after church after church. Objectification, minimization. Perhaps you would think differently about church and God and Jesus. And we can control the meta-narrative of church. But I hope and I pray, men, as we become the people, as we become the men that God has called us to be in loving and serving our wives and the women that we come encounter with and interact with every day, that perhaps the narrative and the reputation of the church will be changed. And maybe what Jesus said would come true, that they would see how we love and they would know we believe. Let's pray together.